When a young man walks into a bank with nothing but a dream, a plan, and a freshly ironed shirt, and the man behind the desk looks right through him like he isn't even there, something happens inside that young man that nobody can see. Something quiet, something permanent, something that will take 40 years to fully understand. That young man was 20 years old. He had walked over a mile in the February cold to get to that bank. He had pressed every crease out of his shirt that morning. He had his plan written on notebook paper, tucked inside a borrowed folder. He had done the math. He had practiced what to say. He had sat up straight in a padded blue chair and believed so hard it felt like a physical thing, like something you could reach into his chest and hold in your hand. And the man behind the desk told him no. No explanation. And no open door, no come back when. Just a flat, final, 5-word wall. And a handshake that never required standing up. The young man picked up his papers. He thanked the man who couldn't look him in the eyes. He walked back out into the cold. And then something happened in that parking lot that nobody, not one single person on earth, witnessed. That young man made a decision, and that decision would quietly change the lives of people who hadn't even been born yet. His name was Michael Jordan. And 40 years later, 40 years of carrying something nobody knew he was carrying, he got into a black SUV, rode back to that same bank, walked through those same doors, and stood in the lobby holding a plain white envelope. No cameras, no press, no announcement, just a man, an envelope, and 40 years of everything in between. See, what was inside that envelope would make a grown woman cry in front of a lobby full of strangers. It would change the lives of 51 people in a single year. It would put something on a wall that people are still reading today. Words that have quietly given permission to people who didn't know they needed it. But here is the part that nobody talks about. Inside that envelope, along with everything else, was a piece of paper so old it had gone soft at the folds. Ink faded from black to gray. Carried in pockets and wallets and gym bags across 6 championships, 2 gold medals, and 40 years of living a life so big it outgrew every building ever built to contain it. 3 words, written at a kitchen table, on the worst night of a 20-year-old's life. Do you want to know what those 3 words were? Watch this entire video, because when we get there, when you finally find out what Michael Jordan wrote on that piece of paper and why he carried it for 40 years and what he did with it on a quiet Thursday morning in October, you will never think about the word no the same way again. This is the story that didn't make the documentaries, the story that didn't make the highlight reels, the story that Michael Jordan never told in an interview. This is the real one. And it starts with a cold morning, a borrowed folder, and a 20-year-old boy who ironed his shirt before walking into a building that had no idea what it was about to accidentally start. The heat in the apartment had stopped working 2 days before. Michael Jordan didn't tell his mother. She had enough to carry already, and he was 20 years old. Old enough, he figured, out to sleep in a cold room without making it somebody else's problem. He piled 2 jackets on top of his blanket and stared at the ceiling until morning came through the curtains like something that didn't particularly want to be there. He got up. He ironed his shirt. That detail matters. Remember it. He stood over that ironing board for 11 minutes. He counted, because he was nervous, and counting gave his hands something to do. He pressed every crease until it was gone. He buttoned every button. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror for a long moment, the way you look at yourself before something that you've decided matters. He looked like what he was, a tall, skinny kid from Wilmington with big hands and a plan written on notebook paper. Then he folded the plan carefully and tucked it inside a manila folder he had borrowed from the university library. The folder had a small sticker on it, a red number 7, left behind by whoever had used it before. He didn't peel it off. He thought, quietly, that 7 was a good number. The walk to Crestfield Savings and Trust took 22 minutes. It was a Tuesday in February, and the cold had teeth that morning. The kind of cold that finds the gap at your collar and doesn't apologize for it. Michael walked with his chin up and his folder under his arm, and his free hand shoved into his coat pocket, wrapped around the piece of notebook paper he'd written his 3-year business projection on. His breath came out in small clouds and dissolved into the gray Wilmington air. The bank sat on the corner of Alderman and Fifth. Dark green sign. Clean windows. A small American flag above the door that was perfectly still because there was no wind, just cold. He stopped on the sidewalk for a moment and looked at it. Then he went in. It smelled like carpet cleaner and old paper and the particular kind of quiet that only exists inside buildings where money lives. A woman at the front desk looked up. Her smile arrived slightly after her eyes did. He told her why he was there. She pointed him toward a row of chairs against the wall. Padded. Dark blue. The kind that are comfortable enough to sit in, but not comfortable enough to forget that you are waiting. He sat. He held his folder in his lap with both hands. He kept his back straight. He waited 19 minutes. The man who finally appeared from the back hallway was named Gerald Pittman, 53 years old. A purple tie, knotted too tight. A face that looked like it had spent 30 years making decisions it never enjoyed and had stopped hoping that would change. He sat down across from Michael. He opened the folder. He did not look up once while he read. Michael watched him and kept breathing and told himself, "Be still. Be calm. You belong here." Gerald Pittman closed the folder. He looked up, not at Michael's eyes, but at a point just beyond his left ear, as if Michael were a painting hung slightly crooked on a wall. Something to be assessed. Something without a voice. "Son," he said, "we're not going to be able to help you today. Not come back when you have more. Not let's revisit this in 6 months. Not even the small mercy of a reason that held any real weight. Just a wall. Flat and final. And built in 5 seconds. Michael did not move, but he let the word land. He let it settle. He sat with it the way his father had taught him to sit with hard things. Not flinching, not fighting, just letting it be what it was, so you could decide later what to do with it. Then he picked up his papers. He straightened them against the table. Tap, tap, tap. The way you straighten something that still has value, even if someone just told you it didn't. He slid them back into the manila folder with the red number 7 sticker. He closed it. He stood up. He extended his hand. Gerald Pittman shook it without standing. "Thank you for your time," Michael said. And then he walked back out through the quiet and the carpet cleaner smell and the door beneath the still American flag and back into the cold February morning. Alone. The sidewalk was empty. A pigeon on the bank sign didn't move. The sky was the color of old dishwater, flat, gray, indifferent to every single thing happening beneath it. Michael Jordan stood on that sidewalk and breathed. 1 breath, 2, 3, and then something happened that nobody saw. Something small and permanent and enormous all at once. He made a decision. Not the kind you announce. Not the kind you write in a journal or tell your friends over lunch. The kind that roots itself in silence. Deep in the chest, down below the embarrassment and the cold and the purple tie, like a seed pressed into very dark soil. He decided that this moment, this gray Tuesday, this padded chair, this man who couldn't look him in the eye, would never be the end of his story. It would be the beginning. He turned up his collar against the cold. He started walking home. He did not take the bus. But the walk home was 1.5 miles. He knew every block of it. The cracked sidewalk outside Mercer's dry cleaning, the fire hydrant on Dowell Street that had been painted over so many times it had lost its original shape, the corner store where Mr. Beaumont kept a radio on the counter and always had it tuned to something with a trumpet in it. Michael walked past all of it and saw none of it. His mind was somewhere else entirely. He wasn't replaying the meeting. He wasn't rehearsing what he should have said differently, or how he could have presented the folder better, or whether the red number 7 sticker on the cover had somehow made him look less serious. He had already decided those thoughts weren't worth the energy it cost to think them. He was thinking about fire. Specifically, he was thinking about what you do with it. Because that's what was happening inside his chest right now. Not sadness, not shame, not the hot and sloppy feeling of wanting to cry. Something with more heat than any of those things. Something pressurized. Something that needed a direction before it became destruction. What do you do with a fire you didn't ask for? He was still thinking about it when he turned onto his street and saw the light on in the kitchen window. His mother was home. Dolores Jordan was standing at the stove when he came through the door, stirring something in a big pot with a long wooden spoon, the way she stirred things, steady and unhurried, like she had all the time in the world and intended to use it wisely. She was humming something low under her breath, a church song, the kind with no rush in it. She heard the door. She turned, so she took one look at his face. She didn't ask a single question. She just turned back to the stove and kept stirring, slow and steady. And that right there, was somehow the kindest thing anyone had done for him all day. The simple grace of not making him explain himself before he was ready. He sat down at the kitchen table. He put the manila folder on the table in front of him. He looked at it. The red number 7 sticker looked back. He sat there in the warmth of the kitchen, in the smell of whatever was in that pot, in the quiet company of his mother's humming, and he felt the fire in his chest begin to find its shape. He reached into the folder. He pulled out the notebook paper, the business projection, the careful math, the plan that had just been told it wasn't good enough. He turned it over to the blank side. He picked up the pen that was sitting beside the salt shaker, and with his jaw set and his hand completely steady, he wrote 3 words. He folded the paper in half, then in half again, pressed the creases flat with his thumb, slowly, deliberately, the same way he had pressed every crease from his shirt that morning. He slid it into his back pocket. He didn't tell his mother what the words were. He didn't tell anyone. Some things aren't for sharing. Some things are just between a person and the version of themselves they're in the process of becoming. His father came home an hour later, still smelling like the machine shop where he spent his days fixing things with his hands, and his patience, and his refusal to leave anything broken that could be made whole. James Jordan sat down across from his son, and he looked at the manila folder on the table. He looked at Michael's face. He read the whole story in about 4 seconds without a single word being spoken, because that is what fathers who pay attention can do. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his voice quiet and without decoration. "You know what they just did?" he said. Michael looked up. "They gave you fuel," his father said. "You decide what you do with it." He pushed back from the table. He stood up. He walked to his son and pressed his lips briefly to the top of his head, the way he used to when Michael was small, when the world was a more manageable size, and then he went to the sink to wash his hands before dinner. Michael sat alone at the table. On the windowsill above the sink, his mother kept a plant, small, unremarkable, and stubbornly alive despite all the evidence suggesting it shouldn't be. He used to tease her about it. "Mama, that thing is never going to bloom." And she would wave him off without turning around. "You don't stop watering just because the ground is stubborn." He looked at the plant. He put his hand over his back pocket, where the folded paper sat. 3 words. Still warm. He thought about that sometimes. How the paper never really cooled. How it traveled with him through the years like a second heartbeat, pressed against whatever was closest to his body. A back pocket. A wallet. A zipper compartment in a gym bag that had logged more miles than most people travel in a lifetime. 3 words. Folded twice. Creases gone soft with time. Always warm. But warmth alone doesn't build anything. And Michael Jordan understood, even at 20, that feeling something deeply is not the same as doing something with it. His father had given him the word, fuel, and fuel is nothing but potential until you strike the match correctly. So he went to work. Not the kind of work that looks dramatic from the outside. Not the kind with a soundtrack. The kind that happens in silence, before sunrise, in empty buildings that echo when you move through them. The University of North Carolina gymnasium at 5 in the morning is a particular kind of alone. The overhead lights take a full minute to warm up when you flip the switch. They buzz and flicker and gradually fill the space with a pale yellow glow that makes everything look slightly underwater. The court smells like rubber and old sweat, and the specific ambition of people who decided that sleep was negotiable. Michael was there every morning before that light finished warming up. He worked on things nobody applauded. The footwork that happened 3 steps before the shot anyone would ever see. The left hand, which he decided was unacceptable and treated accordingly. Drilling it until it stopped being a weakness and started being a weapon. The mental rehearsal that his coach, Dean Smith, had taught him. Standing still at the free throw line with his eyes closed, going through every movement in his mind so completely that by the time his body did it, it was just a memory being repeated. His teammates noticed the change in him after that February Tuesday. There was one in particular, a quiet, small forward named Darnell Pugh, who was 4 years older than Michael and had seen enough to know the difference between a player with talent and a player with something to prove. "He was always good," Darnell said years later, sitting in a barber shop in Charlotte. "But after that winter, he got different. Not louder, not angrier, quieter, like he went somewhere inside himself and found a room nobody else had access to. And he started working from that room." The 1984 NBA draft came like a door swinging open onto a much larger world. Chicago Bulls. 3rd overall pick. A city that needed something to believe in, and a young man who had been building his belief quietly for a year already. He packed his things into 2 duffel bags. Before he zipped the second one, he opened the small front pocket of his old gym bag, the one with the broken zipper pull he'd never replaced, and took out the folded paper. He looked at it for a moment without opening it. He didn't need to open it. He knew what it said. He put it in the breast pocket of the jacket he was traveling in, close to the chest, where it had always lived. He zipped the duffel bag. He picked it up. He walked out the door of that apartment. The same apartment where the heat had stopped working the night before the worst no of his life. And he didn't look back. Not because the past didn't matter, but because he had already decided exactly what it was for. The flight to Chicago was 3 hours. He slept the whole way. The kind of sleep that only comes to people who have made their peace with something. Settled. Deep. Seek a sleep that said, I know where I'm going, and I know what I'm carrying, and I am no longer afraid of either one. 30,000 feet above the earth, in seat 14C of a plane that smelled like recycled air and peanut packets, the folded paper sat against Michael Jordan's chest. Still warm. Chicago was cold in a different way than Wilmington. Wilmington cold was personal. It knew your name. It had the particular bite of a small city that had watched you grow up and wasn't especially impressed. Chicago cold was something else entirely. Vast and democratic and completely indifferent to who you were or what you had inside your breast pocket. It hit you like a wall the moment you stepped outside and reminded you, daily, that the city owed you absolutely nothing. Michael found that clarifying. He liked a city that didn't pretend, and the early years with the Bulls were not a fairy tale. That part gets softened in the retelling. The highlights stitched together so seamlessly that the losses disappear, the setbacks dissolve. The grinding ordinary days between the extraordinary ones vanish completely, as if they never existed. They existed. There were nights in those first seasons when Michael lay on the floor of his apartment. Not the bed, the floor, because sometimes the body wants something firm beneath it, and stared at the ceiling and had a conversation with himself that nobody ever heard. The conversation went like this: Is this enough? And then, after a silence, it has to be. And then he got up. Every single time. He got up. The championships came eventually, the way things come when you refuse to stop walking toward them. Not all at once, not easily, but with a kind of inevitability that only makes sense in reverse. You can't see the pattern while you're inside it. You can only keep moving and trust that the pattern exists. 6 championships, 5 MVP awards, 2 Olympic gold medals, a shoe that became a language, a name that became larger than any one sport could comfortably hold. And through all of it, through the locker rooms and the limousines and the parades and the magazine covers and the noise that followed him everywhere like a second shadow, he kept moving the paper, wallet to wallet, pocket to pocket, bag to bag. The creases went from crisp to soft to something almost translucent at the folds. The ink faded from black to gray, like a voice going quiet but not silent. And the red number 7 sticker was long gone, lost somewhere around 1991 in a hotel room in Portland. But the paper itself held. It always held. His personal assistant of 12 years, a precise and unflappable woman named Beverly Marsh, discovered it once by accident while reorganizing his travel bag before a flight to Paris. She held it up. "What's this?" Michael looked up from his phone. He saw what she was holding. Something moved across his face. Not alarm, not embarrassment, but something more private than either. "Put that back," he said quietly, "exactly where you found it." Beverly put it back. She never touched it again. She never asked about it either. But she noticed, the way careful people notice things they aren't meant to, that wherever Michael Jordan traveled, whatever city, whatever country, in whatever stage of whatever extraordinary life he was living at the time, the folded paper came too, still warm. October 20. The 23 arrived the way it always does in North Carolina. Quietly, without announcement, slipping in behind a cool breeze that makes you think summer might finally be finished apologizing for itself. The leaves on the oak trees along Alderman Street had started turning. Not dramatically, just the edges first. A slow burn working its way inward, patient and inevitable, the way real change always moves. At 9:14 in the morning on a Thursday, a black SUV with tinted windows turned off 5th Street and pulled into the small parking lot of Harlow Community Bank. It sat there for a while. The engine idled, then stopped. Inside the car, Michael Jordan sat in the back seat and looked at the building through the window, the way a person looks at something they have carried inside them for so long that seeing it in real life feels slightly impossible. Like a dream that forgot to disappear when you woke up. The green sign was gone. The new sign was simpler, smaller. The windows were cleaner than he remembered. Someone had planted 2 young maples near the entrance that hadn't been there before. Everything was different, and nothing was different, and both of those things were true simultaneously. He sat with that for a moment. His driver, a steady and silent man named Roy, watched him in the rearview mirror and said nothing. Roy had worked for Michael for 9 years. He understood that there were silences you drove through and silences you waited inside, and that knowing the difference was most of the job. This was a waiting silence. Michael reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. The envelope was there. Plain white. Sealed. No writing on the front. He had sealed it himself at his kitchen table 2 nights before. He had sat alone with a single lamp on and taken a very long time doing it. Not because the sealing was complicated, but because once it was sealed, this was real. This was happening. 40 years of carrying something was about to become 40 years of having carried it. Past tense. Done. He pressed the envelope flat against his chest for just a moment. Then he opened the car door. The October air met him immediately. Cool and clean and smelling faintly of turned leaves and something sweet from the bakery 2 doors down that hadn't existed in 1983. And he stood on the sidewalk and straightened his jacket and looked at the entrance of the bank. 2 young maples, clean windows, a door that hadn't changed. He walked toward it. Behind him, Roy stayed with the car. One security associate, a quiet, broad-shouldered man named Curtis, who had a gift for being invisible in public spaces, followed at a distance that was close enough to matter and far enough to disappear. No cameras, no publicist, no carefully prepared statement for the press. Just a man and an envelope, and 40 years of knowing this moment was coming. He pushed open the door. The smell hit him first. Different cleaning products now. A hint of fresh coffee from a machine near the teller windows. Something faintly citrusy. But underneath all of it, underneath the new smells layered over 2 decades of renovation and rebranding, there was something that hadn't changed. Something in the bones of the building itself. The particular quality of the quiet. The way sound flattened out the moment the door closed behind you. He knew this quiet. He had sat inside it once before, in a blue padded chair, with a manila folder on his knees, and his whole future balanced on someone else's willingness to see him. He stopped just inside the entrance and looked at the corner. The chairs were still there. Different fabric now, a deep burgundy instead of dark blue. But same position, same corner, same arrangement, like they had never been moved, like the room had quietly agreed to keep that particular geometry intact across 40 years of everything else changing. A young teller at the second window glanced up, and then did the particular thing people do when they recognize someone famous in an unexpected location. A fast double-take, a frozen moment, a rapid internal negotiation between what the eyes are reporting and what the brain finds believable. Michael didn't look at her. He was still looking at the chairs. I sat there, he thought. I was 20 years old, and I sat there. and I believed so hard it felt like a physical thing, like something you could have reached into my chest and held in your hand." He pressed his lips together. Then he walked to the front desk. The young woman sitting behind it had a name tag that read Simone in small black letters. She was perhaps 22 years old. She had a pencil tucked behind her ear and a stack of deposit slips to her left, and the expression of someone who had been having a perfectly ordinary Thursday until approximately 11 seconds ago. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Good morning," Michael said, gently, like he understood exactly what was happening behind her eyes and wanted to make it easier. "I was hoping to speak with your branch manager. I don't have an appointment. I apologize for that." Simone nodded. The nodding continued slightly longer than necessary. "Of course," she said. "Can I—" "Yes. Can I get your name?" He told her. She wrote it down. She looked at what she had written. She looked back up at him. She looked back down at the paper, as if confirming that the name hadn't changed between the two glances. It hadn't. "One moment, please, Mr. Jordan," she said, with the careful, deliberate composure of someone who had decided that professionalism was the only life raft available and was holding onto it with both hands. She picked up the phone. In the corner office at the top of a short hallway, Teresa Okafor was doing what she did every Thursday morning, working through a stack of loan applications with a red pen and a cold cup of coffee, and the particular focused patience of someone who understood that each folder on her desk represented an actual human being sitting somewhere waiting for an answer that would change the temperature of their life. She was on the 14th application when the phone rang. She picked up without looking away from the page. "Teresa Okafor." Simone's voice came through the receiver. Steady, impressively steady, Teresa would think later. "Ms. Okafor, there's a gentleman at the front desk asking to speak with you. He says he has something to drop off." "Does he have an appointment?" A small pause. "No, ma'am." Teresa set down her red pen. "Name?" Another pause. Smaller this time. The pause of someone choosing their words, not because they're uncertain, but because they understand that some sentences need a breath before them. "He says his name is Michael Jordan." Teresa Okafor sat very still. Outside her window, a single maple leaf let go of its branch and fell through the October air in a slow, unhurried spiral, taking its time, like something that had been waiting for exactly the right moment to finally come down. Teresa watched the leaf until it disappeared below the window ledge. Then she stood up. She smoothed her jacket with both hands, a habit she had developed over 23 years of walking into rooms where she needed to be taken seriously. She looked at the photograph of her mother on the desk. Her mother looked back with the particular expression she always had in that photograph. Not quite smiling, not quite serious. Something in between. Something that said, "You already know what to do, baby. You've always known." Teresa picked up her pen, set it back down, left it. She walked out of her office and down the short hallway and into the lobby. He was standing near the front desk, with his hands clasped in front of him, looking at the corner where the burgundy chairs sat. He wasn't performing anything. There was no press, no audience, no carefully constructed entrance. He was just a man standing in a bank lobby looking at a corner, with the quiet intensity of someone reading a passage they had memorized long ago. He turned when he heard her footsteps. Teresa had prepared something to say, something professional and warm and competent, something that would convey that she was not a person who became undone by unexpected visitors, regardless of who those visitors happened to be. She forgot every word of it the moment she saw his face. Not because he was famous. She had met notable people before. You don't spend 2 decades in banking without occasionally shaking hands with someone whose name you recognize. It was something else. It was the look on his face, open and private simultaneously. The way a person looks when they have finally arrived somewhere they have been traveling toward for a very long time. And there was no performance in it, no celebrity polish. Just a man, present and unhurried, carrying something that clearly had weight. She put out her hand. "Mr. Jordan, I'm Teresa Okafor, branch manager." He shook it firmly. He looked directly at her, not past her, not through her, at her. The specificity of it was striking, like being handed something you didn't realize you'd been waiting to receive. "Thank you for seeing me," he said. "I know I didn't call ahead." "Please," she said. "Is there something I can help you with?" He reached into his jacket. The lobby did what lobbies do in the moments just before something irreversible happens. It got very quiet. Not silent. The heating system still breathed. The fluorescent lights still hummed their low, constant note. Somewhere behind the teller windows, a keyboard stopped clicking. But the quality of the quiet changed, like the moment before weather arrives. He pulled out the envelope, plain white, sealed. No writing on the front. He held it in both hands the way you hold something that has been with you so long it has become part of your body. And releasing it requires a different kind of courage than anything anyone will ever write about you. Teresa looked at the envelope, then at his face, then at the envelope again. 40 years ago, Michael said, his voice low and unhurried and completely steady. I sat in one of those chairs. He nodded toward the corner. I was 20 years old. I came in with a plan written on notebook paper and a folder I borrowed from the university library. I asked this bank for a small loan. He paused. Let it settle. The man who saw me that day, he never looked me in the eye. Not once. And when he told me no, he didn't stand up. He didn't explain himself. He just... Michael stopped. Something moved briefly across his face. Gone as quickly as it came. He just built a wall and called it a decision. Teresa realized she had stopped breathing at a normal rate. Behind her, she was aware of Simone at the front desk, motionless. Of Curtis near the door, looking at the ceiling. Of the Thursday morning lobby, holding itself completely still, the way witnesses do. Michael held the envelope toward her. I'd like you to have this, he said. Teresa's hands rose to receive it before her mind had fully authorized the movement. It was lighter than she expected, which somehow made it heavier than anything she had ever held. She looked at the envelope in her hands, then at Michael's face. And he was watching her with the patience of someone who had waited 40 years for this moment and could wait 40 more seconds without difficulty. Should I open it now? She asked. That's up to you, he said. But I'd like to tell you something first. She nodded. Her hands were still. When I walked out of this bank in 1983, he said, I was 20 years old, and I had just been told, without a single real reason, that I wasn't worth the risk. He paused, not for effect, for accuracy. Choosing each word the way you choose, footing on uncertain ground. I stood on that sidewalk out there, and I felt something I didn't have a name for yet. Something hot and pressurized, and looking for a direction. He glanced toward the window, toward the parking lot beyond it, toward the sidewalk where a 20-year-old boy had once stood alone in February, cold, and made a silent decision that would quietly govern the next 4 decades of his life. My father called it fuel, Michael said. He was right, but I had to learn how to use it correctly. Because fuel used badly, he shook his head slowly, just burns the wrong things down. Teresa felt something shift in the room. Not dramatically. The way light shifts when a cloud moves, gradual, total, transforming everything without disturbing anything. I never forgot this place, he continued, not out of bitterness. I want to be clear about that. I kept this place in my memory the way you keep a scar, not to suffer over it, but to remember what healed. To remember what you survived. To remember that surviving something is not the same as being defined by it. He looked at the envelope. That's what's in there, he said quietly. Everything I chose to become instead of angry. Teresa looked down. Her thumb found the sealed edge. She thought about the stack of loan applications on her desk upstairs. 14 of them. 14 folders. 14 human beings sitting somewhere in this city right now, in cold apartments or warm kitchens, waiting for a word that would either open a door or build a wall. She thought about a 20-year-old with an ironed shirt and a red number 7 sticker on a borrowed folder. She thought about everything a single no had accidentally started. She slid her finger under the seal. The envelope opened with a sound like a held breath finally released. Inside were 2 things. On the first was a check. Teresa looked at the number. She read it once. She read it again. She looked up at Michael Jordan, and he looked back at her with the steady, uncomplicated expression of a man who had made a decision a long time ago and was simply now finishing the paperwork on it. In the memo line, in handwriting that was unhurried and certain, 4 words, for the ones waiting. Her eyes burned. She pressed her lips together. She breathed through her nose with the fierce concentration of a woman who had spent 23 years earning the right to stand in this office and was absolutely not going to spend this particular moment falling apart in front of anyone. She failed at that. Not catastrophically. Just 1 tear. Just the one. It made it as far as her jaw before she caught it with her knuckle and cleared her throat and straightened her spine. This is, she started. A loan fund, he said, for first-time applicants. People without collateral. People who come in with a plan and a folder and a hope they've been building quietly in private. He looked at the corner, at the burgundy chairs, the ones who sit over there and believe hard enough that you can almost see it coming off them. He looked back at Teresa. I was always enough, he said. I just needed one person to say yes. She reached back into the envelope. The second thing was a piece of paper. Old. Extraordinarily old. Gone soft at the folds the way paper goes when it has been handled with great care over a very long time. She opened it as carefully as she had ever opened anything in her life. The way you open something irreplaceable. Something that exists in the world as a single copy with no possibility of replacement. The ink had faded from black to the pale gray of an old photograph, but the words were still there. 3 of them. She read them. Something moved through the lobby then, something without a name. Something that had no business being inside a bank on a Thursday morning in October, but was there anyway, undeniably, like weather that comes through walls. Teresa looked up. Michael Jordan was watching her face read those 3 words for the first time, and the expression on his was one that she would spend a long time trying to describe to people afterward and never quite manage, because it was too many things at once. Relief, completion, and the particular piece of a man who had carried something heavy for so long that setting it down had changed the way he stood. He looked, she would finally say, like someone who had just come home. I want it framed, he said softly, and hung right there. He pointed at the wall beside the corner chairs, at eye level, so that anyone sitting in those chairs waiting for their answer, he paused, has something true to look at while they wait. Teresa nodded. She didn't trust her voice entirely. She looked one more time at the 3 words on the old soft paper in her hands. 3 words written by a 20-year-old boy at a kitchen table, on the worst night of his young life. Written with a steady hand, and a jaw set hard against the cold and the purple tie, and the wall that had been built and called a decision. On 3 words that had traveled in pockets and wallets and gym bags across 40 years, and 6 championships, and a life so large it had outgrown every building ever built to contain it. 3 words that had always been warm. Watch me rise. The loan fund was announced without fanfare. No press release, no photographs, no carefully timed social media moment. Michael Jordan's team processed the paperwork quietly, and Teresa handled everything else with the same thorough, unhurried attention she brought to every loan application she had ever reviewed. Which is to say, she treated it like it mattered. Because it did. In the first 12 months, 51 people received loans they might otherwise have been denied. A 23-year-old named Dominic Reyes opened an auto repair shop on the east side of the city, and he hired 4 people within the first 6 months. One of them was his younger brother, who had been looking for steady work for 2 years. A woman named Gloria Hendricks, 57 years old, recently widowed, carrying a business idea she had been nurturing privately for 11 years, opened a seamstress and alteration studio 3 blocks from the bank. She had a 4-month waiting list within her first year. A 19-year-old named Jalen Marsh, no relation to Beverly, just the way names sometimes echo across a story, started a tutoring company out of his mother's living room with 3 clients and grew it to 31 by spring. None of them knew whose money it was. That was the condition Michael had set, and the only condition he had set. Anonymous, he had told Teresa, standing in the lobby with his jacket straight and his hands quiet at his sides. It's not about me. It's about the chair in the corner, the burgundy chair where people sit and wait and believe hard enough that you can almost see it coming off them. Teresa had the old paper framed exactly as he asked. Simple black frame, clean glass, eye level, hung on the wall beside the corner chairs so that it was the first thing you saw when you sat down and looked up. She had a small plaque made for beneath it. No name, no explanation, no story attached. Just 4 words in small clean type. For the ones waiting. On the morning she hung it, she stood back and looked at it for a long moment. Simone came and stood beside her. Then the Thursday morning loan applicants began arriving one by one. A young couple with a restaurant idea. A middle-aged man with calloused hands and a landscaping plan. A woman not much older than Simone with a folder held against her chest like something precious. And they sat down in the corner chairs. And they looked up. And they read the 3 words. And something happened in their faces that Teresa would spend the rest of her career watching for and never once growing tired of seeing. Something that looked like permission. Something that looked like, if this is true, if someone wrote these words and meant them and proved them, then maybe. Gerald Pittman had died in 2021. He never knew the chapter he had written in someone else's story. He never knew about the fuel. He never knew that the boy he couldn't look in the eye had gone on to build a life so wide and so high that it cast a shadow across decades. A warm shadow, and the kind that covers and protects rather than darkens. Some people never know what they started. And maybe that is all right. Because the story was never really about Gerald Pittman and his purple tie and his wall built in 5 words. It was about a boy who ironed his shirt the morning before. It was about a father who called rejection fuel and then pressed his lips to the top of his son's head and went to wash his hands. It was about a mother who stirred a pot without asking questions and kept a stubborn plant alive on a windowsill with daily water and unreasonable faith. It was about 3 words pressed into dark soil on a February night and left to grow for 40 years. It was about an envelope, plain white, sealed, no writing on the front, lighter than you'd expect, heavier than anything. And it was about a wall in a corner of a small bank in North Carolina, where the chairs are burgundy now and the maple trees out front are young and still growing, and every Thursday morning people sit down and look up and read what a 20-year-old boy wrote at a kitchen table with a steady hand and a jaw set hard against everything that had just tried to tell him who he was. Watch me rise. He did. And then, after all of it, after everything, after 40 years of rising so high and so far that the bank on Alderman and Fifth had become something small in the rearview mirror of an extraordinary life, he came back, not to settle a score, not to prove a point to a man who could no longer hear it. He came back to turn a no into a yes for every person who would ever sit in that corner and need one. That he came back because his father told him fuel is something you decide what to do with. And Michael Jordan had decided. He had decided on that cold February sidewalk at 20 years old, with his folder under his arm and his heart hammering and his chin level and his whole enormous future still entirely unwritten. He had decided, and then he had spent 40 years making good on it. And then he got back in the black SUV with the tinted windows, and Roy pulled quietly out of the parking lot and onto 5th Street and turned toward the highway. Michael looked out the back window as the bank got smaller. The 2 young maples near the entrance, the clean windows, the door that hadn't changed. He watched until the building disappeared around a corner. Then he faced forward. He put his hand briefly over his breast pocket. The habit of 40 years, to checking for the weight of something that was no longer there. It wasn't there. He had left it on a wall, where it belonged, where the ones waiting could see it. He faced forward, and Roy drove on into the bright October morning, and the city opened up ahead of them, and Michael Jordan sat back in his seat with his hands still and his eyes clear, and the particular expression of a man who has finally, after a very long time, put something down. Not because he was finished, but because he was free. Roy drove without speaking. He understood, after 9 years, that there were 2 kinds of silence in that back seat. The silence that wanted company. A question, a radio station, light conversation about the route or the weather. And the silence that wanted to be left completely alone to finish whatever it had started. This was the second kind. So Roy drove, and Michael sat, and the October city moved past the tinted windows like a film playing for an audience of one. He was thinking about his father. James Jordan had been gone since 1993. 30 years. And still, there were moments when something happened in Michael's life that was large enough, or quiet enough, or true enough, that his first instinct was to reach for a phone that would never ring on the other end. This was one of those moments. He wanted to tell his father what he had just done. He wanted to sit across from him at that kitchen table one more time. The one with the wobbly left leg that James always said he'd fix, and never did, because somehow the wobble became familiar, and familiar became comfortable, and slide the envelope across the surface and watch his father's face read the memo line. If for the ones waiting. He thought his father would have been quiet for a long time after reading it. And then he thought his father would have nodded. Once. Slowly. The way James Jordan nodded when something was so right that words would only make it smaller. And then he might have said, because this is exactly the kind of thing James Jordan would have said, "Took you long enough." And Michael would have laughed, the real laugh, the one that came from somewhere below performance, the one that only people who knew him before he was famous ever heard regularly. He almost laughed now, alone in the back seat, thinking about it. Almost. He pressed his hand flat against his breast pocket one more time. Still the same reflex. Probably always would be. 40 years of carrying something leaves a mark on the body that the body doesn't quickly forget. Like a callus. Like a groove worn into wood by a hand that gripped the same place 10,000 times. He let his hand fall. Outside the window, the city gave way to highway. The buildings thinned. The sky opened up, wide and blue and effortlessly large, the kind of sky that makes human problems look appropriately sized. Michael watched it. He thought about Teresa Okafor smoothing her jacket with both hands. He thought about Simone's face behind the desk. He thought about the burgundy chairs in the corner, and the wall beside them, and the small black frame that was hanging there right now in the lobby of a bank on Alderman and Fifth. He thought about the people who would sit in those chairs next Thursday, and the Thursday after that, and every Thursday stretching forward into a future he would never see but had quietly helped to shape. He thought about a plant on a windowsill, small, unremarkable, stubbornly alive despite all evidence suggesting it shouldn't be. His mother had moved that plant 3 times across 3 different houses over the decades, each time wrapping the pot carefully in newspaper, settling it into the back seat of whatever car they were driving, setting it in the new kitchen window before she unpacked a single box. He had asked her once, not long before she moved into the house he bought her, why she kept it. It barely grew. It never bloomed. It was just a small green presence that required daily attention and returned almost nothing visible. His mother had given him the look she reserved for questions that had obvious answers being asked by people who should know better by now. "Baby," she said, "it's alive, isn't it?" He thought about that. He thought about 51 people who had sat in burgundy chairs and walked out of a bank with a yes they almost hadn't received. 51 small green things that were alive now. Alive and growing. Because someone had decided that watering mattered even when the ground was stubborn. Dominic and his shop, Gloria and her studio, young Jalen and his 31 tutoring clients, and the spring still ahead of him. All of it growing from a seed planted in the dark on a February night in 1983 by a 20-year-old boy who had nothing except the decision to keep going. Michael Jordan looked out at the wide blue sky. He breathed in. He breathed out. And somewhere behind him, getting smaller with every mile, but permanent now, fixed to a wall at eye level in a corner where the ones waiting could see it, 3 words sat inside a simple black frame with clean glass, written in ink that had faded from black to gray to something almost silver, the color of something that has traveled very far, and survived. That word stayed with Teresa long after the black SUV disappeared from the parking lot. She stood at the lobby window and watched it go, watched it turn onto 5th Street and merge into the ordinary Thursday morning traffic, and become indistinguishable from every other vehicle moving through the city. And she thought about survival, what it actually meant, what it cost, what it quietly produced in the dark, without anyone watching. She was still holding the empty envelope. She hadn't put it down yet. She wasn't sure she was ready to. Simone appeared beside her, close enough to be present, far enough to be respectful. And for a moment, the two of them just stood there together at the window, saying nothing, looking at the space where the SUV had been. "Ms. Okafor," Simone said finally, her voice careful and young and full of something she was still finding language for. "What was on the paper? The old one? The one he left?" Teresa looked at her. Simone was 22 years old. She had started at the bank 8 months ago. She took the bus in from the east side every morning, and was never late, and kept a photograph of her younger sister tucked into the corner of her workstation, and had applied twice for a promotion she hadn't received yet. Teresa had approved her third application just last week. She looked at this young woman, with her pencil still tucked behind her ear, and her eyes full of the particular hunger of someone who was just beginning to understand how large their own life could become. And she made a decision. She took Simone by the hand. She walked her to the corner, to the wall beside the burgundy chairs where the small black frame now hung at eye level, freshly placed, slightly crooked because Curtis had hung it before leaving, and Curtis had many gifts, and a perfectly level eye was not among them. And she stood beside Simone and let her read it. Simone read the 3 words. Her lips moved slightly, the way lips move when the eyes find something worth slowing down for. Then she was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached up and straightened the frame. Just slightly. Just enough. The small, instinctive gesture of someone who recognizes that something valuable deserves to hang right. "He wrote that at 20?" she said. "At 20, Teresa said. "On the worst night of his young life, with a steady hand." Simone looked at the words one more time. Teresa watched her face and saw the exact moment it landed. Saw the thing that she had known she would spend the rest of her career watching for and never tire of seeing. Permission. The particular light of a person realizing that someone walked this exact road before them, that someone sat in this very kind of corner, in this very kind of chair, carrying this very kind of hope, and wrote 3 words instead of giving up, and then went out and made those words undeniably, irrefutably, extraordinarily true. Simone straightened her own jacket, an unconscious gesture, barely noticeable. But Teresa noticed. She noticed because she understood, the way careful people understand things that matter, that this was how it worked. This was the whole invisible machinery of it. Not the championships. Not the check with 4 words in the memo line, though that too. Not the famous name on a famous wall in a famous building somewhere. This. A young woman straightening her jacket in a bank corner on a Thursday morning in October, reading 3 words written 40 years ago by someone who had no guarantee they were true, only the decision to make them so. The ones who come after. That was always who it was for. The boy in the ironed shirt who walks in with a folder and a plan and sits down in the chair and believes so hard you can almost see it coming off him. The young woman with the pencil behind her ear who takes the bus in from the east side and is never late and is waiting, patient and capable and entirely unaware of how much is still ahead of her. All of them. Every single one of them sitting in every corner of every lobby in every city, holding hope like a folder of papers, waiting for a word that could open a door or build a wall. They were who the check was for. They were who the frame was for. They were who the 3 words were for, had always been for, from the moment a 20-year-old boy pressed a pen to the back of a rejected loan application at a kitchen table, while his mother stirred a pot, and his father washed his hands, and a stubborn plant sat alive on a windowsill asking nothing of anyone except to be watered. Watch me rise. 3 words, written in the dark, for the light. For every person who would ever need to borrow them before they found their own. Before you go, drop a comment right now and tell me where you are watching this from. It could be a small town or a big city, a quiet bedroom or a busy lunch break. I genuinely want to know. People from all over the world find their way to these stories, and every single location in that comment section makes this community more beautiful. If this story moved you even a little, if it made you think about a no that secretly fueled you, or a person who believed in you when someone else didn't, please hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it tells the world that stories about resilience and quiet dignity and the long game of becoming who you were always meant to be. Those stories matter. Those stories deserve to be heard. And if you believe that kindness is worth spreading, that the right words at the right moment can change the entire direction of a person's life, then subscribe to this channel. Because that is exactly what we do here. Every single video. We find the stories that didn't make the headlines. The ones that happened in parking lots and kitchen tables and bank lobbies. The ones that took 40 years to finish telling. You belong in this community. And right now, on your screen, there is another story waiting for you. 1 click. That is all it takes. Go watch it. And remember what 3 words can do when a person refuses to give up.